Hi, this is Brian Russell. I want to go over with you the grammatical, syntactical analysis of Psalm 77, verses 2 and 11. That's English translation, verses 1 and 10. There's a couple of new forms here that may have caused you a little bit of trouble, and I'll try to clarify that for you. Let's start with verse 2. We'll make this just a little bit bigger here on the Hebrew. It opens up, and notice we have this repeated form. This repeated form. So essentially, I cried aloud to God that He may hear me. This is a version of a staircase parallelism when you have these whole phrases. But essentially, we have koli, which is my voice, to God. My voice, that noun would simply be a nominative absolute because it stands outside of the sentence structure. It's outside of the initial first clause, which begins with this verb. So my voice to Yahweh. Set this phrase here, Elohim. Again, it'll be the same with these with this repetition of the phrase. But koli, Elohim. In both cases, we have a nominative absolute. Notice it has the hirik yod. It has the pronominal suffix on there for possession. My voice. And then for L, make sure you're going to Arnold Choi, section 4.5, and going to the prepositions and finding the correct, or 4.1, sorry, for L, and we'll find that it's 4.1. Point 2, and this would be a terminative, so it's giving the direction, my cry to God. Notice English translations add things up there, but we don't have to do that. Then we get the main verb, and this would be, this is a new form here. This is a cohortative. It's a call. The word means cry out, so the call, that's simply fiative. But what's the cohortative? A cohortative is a type of verb. It has to do essentially a first-person imperative when you're kind of giving a command to yourself, and you find the cohortatives in 3.3, and this would essentially be resolve. In other words, the psalmist is resolving, I cry out. So my voice to God, I cry out. My voice to Elohim. And then we get the next verb. And notice this is important. We have a vav on the front of this. And then this is a hifil perfect. Okay? Now, this is a perfect plus vav. I doubt if you got to talk about this in OT 501. But whenever you have a vav on a verb, perfect or an imperfect, you want to pay particular attention. If it's on an imperfect, it's going to be an imperfect plus vav consecutive, that past narrative. But there's also the perfect plus vav consecutive. Now, what's the force of the hifil here? This is the word for ear. This is it's not really a causative sense, and he heard me. This is more of a, if you go to the hifil section, we'll look at that first. This would be an example of denominative. This is the kind of verb where it just takes this particular root, so it indicates a verbal idea. You would know that. You could also go to one of your lexicons and observe that this particular root doesn't use a bunch of stems. It takes the hifil. This is a denominative use of the hifil. There's no causation implicit here. Now, in terms of the perfect plus vav consecutive, that would be 3.5.2, and we haven't seen too many of these. But essentially what this form does is when it follows another verb, in this case it's following a cohortative verb, we're getting the idea of purpose in this sense. So if you look at the options, the perfect plus vav consecutive, you're going to get this idea of purpose. This is the idea of succession, and you can see it down towards the bottom of the page for this one. So that's a perfect plus vav consecutive succession. Then we have and he listens to me. Again, that's the same kind of use that we saw previously. Go to 4.1.3, look up the, or 4.1.2, and look up the terminative use here, or in this case even it's kind of declarative or perceptual in the sense that it's receiving the idea of a perception of listening. So this would be the perceptual use of L. Okay, that's verse 2. Let's go down to verse 11 now. And again, this would be English verse 10. Starts off with a Vav consecutive imperfect or past narrative from Amar. So this would be a call, Vav consecutive. So we're going to look up 3.5.1. And you would probably call this sequential in the sense that it's just taking on it's following the action that came directly in front of it, or potentially you could also call it consequential if you thought verse 9 was the cause of that. So there would be two options for the past narrative or Vav consecutive. What kind of call is this? This is simply a fiative. Now, here's where we get into some of the interesting piece. Here we have a pronoun, third feminine singular, he, and we have a word that this essentially means grief or appeal. There's some question exactly the form that takes place here. Again, there's a lot of textual problems. If you notice, our two English translations take this as a noun, whether it's appeal or it's grief. And so you could either say something like he is the, and this will then function as a predicate nominative. This is a pronoun, he, and in this case it's feminine because this noun would be feminine. So something like demonstrative, this is my grief, this is my appeal. Then we get, if you looked at the previous video, you know, I discussed this. Was this a noun, which would be years of right hand of the Most High, or is this a infinitive construct from Shana, which would be changed, and that would give the idea the right hand of the Most High has changed. In this case, this would be the call infinitive construct, and I'm going to analyze it that way as a call infinitive. Again, this is a fiative as a call, and then the infinitive construct. Let's go back and take a look at that. In the infinitive construct, this is functioning almost like a regular verb in this case, kind of like, and so I would call this the nominal use. So it's the idea of the right hand of the Lord has changed, and I think that would be the best way to analyze this particular one. And then we have right hand. It's in construct. It's mostly in construct really by context. This form itself doesn't give a clue, but right hand of the Most High. This would be the right hand, the Most High's right hand. So this is clearly a genitive of possession, and this ends up functioning as essentially the subject of this verb. So this is my appeal. This is my grief. The right hand of the Lord has changed. If you have any questions about the grammar, let me know. It's my privilege to serve you. And again, go back and listen to the other video on Psalm 17 where I talk a little bit more about especially verse 10 or verse 11 and 10 in English, verse 11 in Hebrew.